So we're ready. You're ready. We have this morning, in fact, for the whole day, as you'll be aware, a two-stage conference program dedicated to the maritime sector and driven the whole maritime sector being driven by the need to defossilize, decarbonize, and to find new ways of powering ships to traverse the world with new fuels to address all the issues around CO2 emissions. And so we can't all know what the future will be, but one thing we do know is it'll be different from today. And another thing we know is that there will be a variety of fuels to power ships in the future, and today we are particularly we're very fortunate and very honored to have such a range of approaches on the stage that will be we hope very much will be the household names of the future. Some of them are established and well known. Some of the people on the stage here are newcomers, but have really interesting approaches to how to valorize biomass or low carbon feedstocks to produce sustainable fuels for shipping. So we will have viewpoints on gasification and then treatment of syngas, valorizing of biogenic CO2 or directly from biogas to a liquid fuel, microwave cracking. So that's a magic box that we're all going to hope that Jens will open for us. We're something not many of us know much about, I think, so that's going to be really interesting. And then also pyrolysis of different kind of feedstocks to produce a bio-oil for refining. So you can see there are different pathways to enable us to get to sustainable shipping fuels that have different statuses of technological maturity, but they're all coming through. And we're going to learn a lot about all of those today. So we're very fortunate that this morning we have such an array and such an interesting combination of different approaches, and then we will continue this afternoon with more of the same. And this afternoon we'll also have a strong focus on LNG and bio-LNG and what is going on in this field as well. There we are. So that's like you have the detailed program, but that's just a quick resume. I'm going to now hand the microphone to Tim Scarborough of Ricardo, who is very much a recognized expert in the domain of the maritime sector and on fuels, and has also a lot of experience in terms of the regulatory framework and working with the major institutions that determine what will happen and how future fuels will develop. So he will tell you more about that. That's what I'm now going to do, is hand the microphone over to Tim. So Tim, please.
Thanks very much, Paul, and delighted to be here with you this morning. As Paul said, my name is Tim Scarborough. I'm Director of Maritime at Ricardo, and Paul asked me to set the scene for you today with the latest EU and IMO policy developments. So that's the first half of my presentation. The second half, you can see there's two parts on the slide, is to give you the latest updates of a piece of work we've just been completing for the IMO with a paper that gets published, I think tomorrow, submitted tomorrow to the IMO. And that is on the wider sustainability criteria. So to start with, on the EU and IMO policy status. So as you should know, there was a landmark occasion last summer. The IMO agreed a more ambitious decarbonisation strategy, which took down to 2050. So that's the business as usual emissions, and that's what the target looks like compared to that. So it's quite ambitious. There's a lot to do. They also agreed some intermediate checkpoints, which helps to show the shape of what's coming. So if we draw a dotted line through there, that's the shape that we need to be targeting. So when we're thinking about the future fuels and the fuel producers on the stage, to think about this is what they need to be looking for on a global stage. To help us in the short term, The IMO also agreed a target for 5 to 10%. The 10% was striving for, in their language, 5% of energy in 2030 to be already from zero and near zero greenhouse gas fuels. The aim of that is to kickstart the transition. Okay. So that was a strategy, but it isn't actually yet a set of policy measures, right? So they haven't agreed the set of policy measures that are going to transition them from their business as usual to that new strategy. And that is what is going on at the moment. And what it's going to be is some sort of combination of a technical measure and an economic measure. The technical measure is going to be some sort of global greenhouse gas fuel standard. That's been there's generally large agreement across the countries of the world that there's going to be some sort of greenhouse gas fuel standard. The economic measure is a little bit more uncertain. There was a lot of discussion about whether it could be a levy. Many countries were for, many countries were against. The labelling that the IMO has put on it for the time being is a sort of carbon pricing system. There's also going to be some sort of further push on the energy efficiency measures, because it's well recognised that considering the high cost of future fuels, in order to minimise that burden, there needs to be greater uptake of energy efficiency measures as well. In terms of the timetable, I know someone was asking me about that. They're underway at the moment with discussing the options, the policy options. So there is a comprehensive impact assessment process going on at the moment, and that continues through this year, continuing to do the assessment of those impacts. And then we get to a stage in 2025 when they will be agreeing the policy measures. They won't come into effect until 2027. All of these time steps have been largely laid out. So if I just give you a little bit more flavour of what that technical greenhouse gas fuel standard might look like, this is taken a picture taken from the EU submission to the IMO negotiations. The take-home messages are really twofold. One, on the left-hand side, is that you've got ships which comply, won't need to do anything. Ships which might be ahead of the curve will be able to pass on some credits to vessel owners, operators that are behind the curve. And it's the curve on the right-hand side that I want you to bear in mind, because if you recall on the previous slide, we had a similar sort of curve. And that is the way things are going. In terms of the approach from the IMO to tackle biofuels, there's been a little bit of information already, which is in the form of some interim guidance from the IMO about how to tackle biofuels. And they've said already in the context of the DCS and the CII that those biofuels need to be certified by an international certification scheme. They need to meet the sustainability criteria, and they've also specified a greenhouse gas reduction target, a greenhouse gas intensity target of 65% compared to the 95 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, which is a figure you'll recognise also from the RED, Renewable Energy Directive in Europe. And then over time, we'll also get further clarity from the IMO's official LCO guidelines, the first version of which came up in July last year. And thus far, that version has only really given a few nuggets of information. It's prescribed some well-to-tank emission factors of greenhouse gas intensity for FAME and for HVO, but largely there's a lot of blank boxes that need to get filled in. So that means there's a lot of further need for evidence provision going into that process to help them develop those valuations. The IMO has taken a qualitative risk-based approach to indirect land use change, ILUC, so relevant to bio-based feedstocks, fuels, which differs from the likes of Corsia or California's low carbon fuel standard, for example, and I'll come back to that later on. So switching now to the EU. The EU has made some very significant progress because it's already got to the point of having agreed some policy measures. The left-hand side is showing you about the EU ETS. So that's come in force this year, start of 2024, where vessel operators need to begin to monitor their emissions for then reporting next year and surrendering the number of allowances. It takes a tank-to-wake approach, whereas on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that the FuelEU Maritime, which got published in September in the autumn last year, that really has taken a well-to-wake approach. So in line with what the IMO is doing, because the IMO has taken a well-to-wake approach as well. But further information is still needed from the IMO. Just on the biofuels, the boxes at the bottom, I thought you might be interested in that. There's some stipulation there about how those need to get treated. The ETS says, okay, well, it's in line with how all the other ETS sectors treat biofuels. And the FuelEU specifies there's that 65% reduction as required by RED. The FuelEU often differs to the Renewable Energy Directive. I want to focus a bit more on that FuelEU Maritime because that's where we've got a bit more clarity on the implications for maritime. And it sets a set of greenhouse gas intensity reduction standards that need to come down over time. And when you plot them on a graph, this is what it looks like. So that's in grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. And you can infer from that, given that the fossil fuels have to use specific targets, you can infer that you can't use VLSFO or MDO past 2025. And depending on the accounting that you do with which particular methane slip you assume, and how much pilot fuel you might use of MDO to combine with LNG, you'll either have 2035 or 2040 date, by which point LNG doesn't work anymore under FuelEU Maritime. That's on obviously a vessel by vessel level. If I click through, because at the bottom right, there's actually the flexibility mechanism within FuelEU, which is that fleet operators can think about their whole fleet at once, so they don't have to just consider one vessel at a time. If they've got one vessel which is over-compliant, that could compensate for some others. So that's a useful summary on a page of all about FuelEU. But what I wanted to point out to you is if we look at the IMO strategy and the targets that are in that, and thinking ahead to how they will need to put that effectively into action with the policy measures that get agreed. If we look at that compared to the FuelEU, we come up with an interesting finding, and I take a bit of artistic license to put them on the same graph. But basically, I've come to the conclusion that investment should be made today and by the maritime sector to base on the reductions that they expect under the IMO and not the FuelEU, because there's now in green shown against that what the IMO strategy looks like plotted on the same curve, on the same graph, and you can see that it's more ambitious. And actually, because the IMO strategy is on absolute emissions, but the technical measure that the IMO needs to introduce is going to be on greenhouse gas intensity, considering that trade flows continue to increase and have been increasing since 2008, work that's been done already looking at what greenhouse gas intensities would need to be in order for a fleet overall to generate the emission reductions targets for the IMO is what you then see in red, which is even more stringent than that. So I think it's important that we take the cue from the EU that they have introduced FuelEU Maritime, but that we look ahead to what those future regulations are, which are coming, because I think that's going to drive change even more. So to summarize this part of the presentation, so the substantial investments are needed to implement zero or near zero greenhouse gas emission fuels to reach the IMO targets. The well-to-wake approach that's been adopted is really going to generate the market for truly green fuels. From the IMO side, the IMO has life cycle assessment guidelines, LCA guidelines, and that will mean that biofuels can play a part in that, subject to meeting the greenhouse gas intensity certification and meeting wider sustainability requirements. More on that in a moment. The evidence base will continue to be important to feed in through life cycle assessments to give the clarity for owners and operators for their investment decisions. And then I want to draw you back to those curves now. So imagine in your mind, you've got those slides in your mind from before. We need to think about this in different speeds of the transition. So fuels that are meeting shorter term requirements with lower greenhouse gas reductions offer incremental change through the 2030s. Whereas maybe we need to be thinking longer term for those investment decisions that the maritime industry needs to make, considering the long lifetime of the vessels, the investments that they need to make are really need to look at further ahead. So scalable fuel options that can really truly meet the near zero greenhouse gas emissions, those are the ones offering the long term and the step change deployment in the 2040s that is necessary. So that was a high level overview of the policy developments which have been going on. I wanted to now just go through a few points from a piece of work that we've been doing for the International Maritime Organization, which is just concluding, and it's feeding into their work on the life cycle assessment guidelines. So just in a nutshell, this is work that was requested for the IMO to conduct at the major meeting in July last year. They asked Ricardo to do the work, which I've overseen. We delivered the draft work to a workshop, an expert workshop in December. We've had comments back, and the paper's getting submitted tomorrow, I believe, to the IMO. Overall, this work has been reviewing the sustainability themes of marine fuels, regulatory frameworks that already exist, as well as voluntary standards, certification schemes, to really have a look at, across those various regulatory schemes, how they cover the sustainability themes that need to be considered, not just greenhouse gas emissions. We looked at a number of case studies to assess particular fuel pathways as examples to illustrate how the sustainability aspects are applied across the various sustainability practices of the regulatory standards. We compared results with the IMO LCA guidelines. Really, the IMO wanted us to make some recommendations for what they do next. So my final slides on this today are going to give you some hints as to changes that we might see at the IMO based on this study. So on the sustainability criteria, so there's in the IMO LCA guidelines, it doesn't just cover greenhouse gas emissions, it covers 10 sustainability themes, which are listed there. And we assessed various methodologies that are already out there among, together with the IMO to assess the robustness of the methodologies for accounting for each of these different sustainability criteria. The findings were that indirect land use change, often associated with biofuels, was the weakest components of these methodologies, often based on significant variation in those methodologies, to be perfectly honest. We also rated the uncertainty of different fuel types when looking through the lenses of these different sustainability frameworks. And against each of the categories there, you can see e-fuels, blue fuels, conventional, advanced biofuels, and electricity for future battery electric vessels. And conventional biofuels came up as having the highest level of uncertainty in the methodologies for deployment. In reviewing the existing aspects, the regulatory frameworks that we looked at, you can see going across there, included the Renewable Energy Directive in the EU, the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, included voluntary frameworks such as CORSIA, and certification schemes such as ISCC. And we identified that none of them actually cover the full range of marine fuels that are being considered. So this is really a regulatory improvement that needs to be made if the marine fuels need to get regulated in this way. We identified that often the voluntary standards are moving a little bit ahead of the regulatory ones in covering a broader range of the sustainability themes. So it's important that the regulatory frameworks catch up, because obviously if we're transitioning to a world with different fuels, we need to make sure that wider environmental considerations are taken into account. We're not just focused, for example, on greenhouse gas emissions. We don't end up with some other environmental problems. Greenhouse gas emissions is the most well accounted for metric, and water is the least among all of those frameworks. We looked at various case studies and assessed how those sustainability criteria are practically applied across them. So soybeans for HVO production, we identify that there's across the various frameworks, there's a common approach to quantitatively account for greenhouse gas emissions and direct land use change, but approaches to indirect land use change often differ for this crop feedstock. For palm fatty acid distillate, again for HVO production, there was a lot of unclear feedstock categorization, really about how it's categorized. Is it categorized as a co-product, a byproduct, or a residue? And this leads to very large ranges in the literature for the well-to-tank greenhouse gas emission estimates. And clearly, some people are wanting to know, are they going to be able to claim carbon credits for these sorts of fuels or not? We've got some, it's important to get clarity in the regulatory frameworks on this. So that's now been highlighted to the regulators. We looked at the example of used cooking oil for HVO production based on the fraudulent production concerns. That uncertainty is not captured in regulatory frameworks, so it's something that needs to get tackled because the certification process has got challenges as a result of that uncertainty. The final biomass-based case study was on forestry residues for Fischer-Tropsch diesel. We identified that the EU Renewable Energy Directive has got the most stringent requirements on this, and adopting a risk-based approach, and that regulatory frameworks often don't cover this area well and define some no-go areas for what can't be covered. The fifth case study is not on biomass, so I'm not going to cover that now. So just a few slides on the findings. The IMO LCA guidelines are what have already been produced, by the way, and is what are going to be referred to and deferred to in the future regulations. So I think they're important to address. The IMO first version of them needs to get updated because there's a lot of gaps in it. So our comparison with those guidelines identified for the IMO that they do provide a consistent definition of direct land use change in line with other regulatory frameworks. We've identified that they adopt a qualitative risk-based approach, so that's consistent with some frameworks like Renewable Energy Directive, but definitions of high and low risk feedstocks are not fully developed. And we note that other regulatory frameworks have adopted a different approach. They've adopted a quantitative approach. More on that in a second. The IMO LCA guidelines go beyond other regulatory frameworks in considering fugitive emissions, because many of the other sectors that have got other regulatory frameworks applied don't have or so many gaseous fuels to need to consider. So the IMO is a little bit ahead of that and does take that well into account. The point I was just making before, there's some further clarity that's needed on definitions of feedstock categories. There's some ambiguity on co-product. And lastly, there's already in the guidelines a very long list of fuel pathways, but it doesn't always have all of the default values. It doesn't always have a list of all of the eligible feedstocks for those pathways, so we've recommended that the IMO further develop that. I mentioned before about the ILUC, so this is just to introduced that for indirect land use change, there's 2 different approaches, and regulatory frameworks are going 2 different ways on this at the moment. Okay, so some standards like California Low Carbon Fuel Standard and CORSIA have taken a quantitative approach, which is the lower pathway here, and overall that's considered to be a less robust approach to preventing indirect land use change, because it's still allowed. It's just effectively penalised and disincentivized, but it doesn't prevent it. Whereas the qualitative approach can actually just simply rule out some feedstocks. So we made some recommendations. There's just this slide and one more about the recommendations. In the paper that we produced, there's many more recommendations. I just filtered these just to cover the ones that I thought were most relevant for you in the discussion today. And those recommendations were about developing more robust definitions on categorizing feedstocks as high or low indirect land use risk. We recommended that they tackle that in the short term. We also recommended that they could reconsider, actually, whether they are happy taking the qualitative risk-based approach for indirect land use change, because of other regulatory frameworks having gone a different way. It's not saying they're going to do it, we gave them a recommendation to have a look at that. The aim is, of course, to try and limit the use of high ILUC risk fuels. Again, we recommended they do that in the short term. The other recommendation we made on bio-based feedstocks was to review the wording around utilising high carbon stock and converted high carbon stock land. Okay, so that would be aiming to reduce the risk of high carbon land being used for feedstock cultivation and fuel production. So we recommend that they tackle that next. That's been a rapid whiz through. The report that we have produced for the IMO will be published on the Future Fuels website of the IMO. Come find me afterwards if you need a link to that, because the IMO only gave me a link to it after I'd finalised the presentation. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I've been Tim Scarborough from Ricardo. Thank you.
Tim, many thanks for that comprehensive overview and setting the scene for us very nicely. I'd like to open to the floor if anybody has a question they would like to ask. Thank you. Please start by just saying who you are, which organization you're from.
Laurent Mo, I'm working in LNG, a subsidiary of NG for LNG terminals. And I have a question in your assessment, your comparison between IMO and on FuelEU. IMO, as I understood, may have changed, expressed in GHG per ton per kilometer. So usually IMO is speaking in terms of not of absolute reduction, but of reduction on the base of the transport of goods, which means that if you go at a slower speed, for instance, you consume less fuel and you get a higher reduction. Is that still the case in the IMO solution that is expected for 2025? And if this is the case, does it change the comparison scale between the two regulations?
Great question, Laurent. Thank you for the question. So it's probably worth noting there's several different policy measures that the IMO has to try to regulate overall the greenhouse gas emissions from ships. And the one that I was talking about today is on the future regulation of the greenhouse gas intensity, and the expectation that would be considered on a metric of grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, whilst there are other policy measures such as CII that might continue adopting that sort of approach like you mentioned, with different metrics. We don't know yet exactly how the IMO policy measure is going to be laid out, because we're not there yet. And I'd love to give you further intelligence if I had it, but I don't. So we can only speculate for the time being. We can have a look at the fact that the IMO LCA guidelines uses the grams per megajoule approach, and it might well be that they need to rely on that because they have said that they're going to take a well-to-wake approach, and the LCA guidelines do take a well-to-wake approach.
Okay, we do have time for one more question. If there is a burning issue someone would like to raise. Not for now. Okay, otherwise, of course, Tim is available afterwards if you want to come and speak to him personally. Thank you very much, Tim. So now I'd like to invite Denis ARGUIN to the stage. Denis is representing today a company, a Canadian company by the name of ENERKEM, who are well-known actors in this field, also for sustainable aviation fuels, who were speaking yesterday. So please, Denis, who is the Vice President of Strategic Relationships of ENERKEM, please come and take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Bonjour, good morning. Very pleased to be here for a second time. I'll talk to you about how we see sustainable methanol, and you will see the difference between sustainable methanol and maybe biomethanol. So maybe first I will introduce the company. ENERKEM is a leader in low carbon intensity solution. We are a technology developer, but also project developer. We're a bunch of about 250 people of very enthusiastic and very innovative people, mostly based in Canada, but we have some in Europe as well. Obviously, the technology is protected with over 120 patents. We've been at it for over 20 years, and we have multiple projects under construction and under development. I think one of the big differentiator is that we've been able to develop very world-class strategic partnership with people like Repsol, Shell, Suncor, and Proman. Proman is the second largest methanol producer in the world. I'll introduce you to the technology. So ENERKEM has based its technology on fluidized bed gasification. As I said, we've been at it for 20 years. We started developing this technology for biomass to power. That was the initial idea. And then as things evolved, we quickly saw that there was availability of biomass is not available everywhere. And also producing power from biomass might not be the best business model, at least in North America. So we start playing with different feedstock, and we develop the capability for a wide range of feedstock. So just explain a little bit the way that this is structured. So we have feedstock coming in. So we have, as I said, a wide range. So we can process from obviously biomass, contaminated biomass, municipal solid waste, waste plastic from, residual from recycling facility. The preparation is quite standard in the waste management, so not very difficult to prepare. So we just need to reduce the size of the material so that we can move it. So we reduce it down to below 7 centimeters, sorry. I'm always thinking in inches, so sorry for the difference. Then we need to remove inerts. So usually when we talk about municipal solid waste, we reduce inert probably from 25% down to 10%. We can go below that, but below that, the capital costs and operating costs are more than the benefit that we get. So we stop at around 10-15%. And then obviously moisture. Obviously we can run with high moisture content, but you transform your reactor in a boiler, not necessarily the smartest thing to do. So if we use municipal solid waste or biomass, we'll dry with residual heat from the process. So very standard feedstock preparation. And then the material coming to our reactor, if you take municipal solid waste, looks like shredded plastic or shredded paper. So very fluffy material. So the technology, as I mentioned, is gasification. So we have a two-stage gasification process. So the first stage is a bubbling bed gasifier. So bubbling bed allows you to work with heterogeneous feedstock. Obviously, municipal solid waste, there's no spec on it, so it doesn't get more heterogeneous than this. So the bubbling bed ensures that you have a good mixing, a good mass transfer. And then we crack the material to convert the carbon-containing material into a raw syngas. As I mentioned, you still have about 10-15% of inerts, so we have continuous extraction of the inert at the bottom of the reactor. So this is the easy part. And then after that, from the roasting gas, we're going into a thermal reforming step, so higher temperature, so that we can go to almost methane extension. So you're only left with carbon monoxide, hydrogen, CO2, and then water, obviously. Then we develop a cleaning of the syngas, so we have a two-stage scrubbing system using different conditions on water scrubber, plus what we call acid gas removal, where we're using chilled methanol to remove acid gas, such as sulfur-containing gas or CO2. So coming out of this process, we have ultra-pure syngas, which is same quality as syngas produced from natural gas. And then we go to catalytic conversion. So we've developed two pathways. One pathway is the methanol, which is the one that is of interest today. But we also developed, because in North America, methanol is not an approved road transportation biofuel. So we need to go to ethanol. So we developed the methanol to ethanol platform. Obviously, if you have ethanol and methanol, you can go to different market using our technology or third-party technology. So we can go to methanol to jet. We can go to ethanol to jet. We can go to, with Fischer-Tropsch as well, to jet. We can go to MTO, which is methanol to olefin, and as well DME, which is a replacement of LPG. So what is our competitive advantage? I guess the main one is the maturity. We've been operating a facility in Canada since 2017, processing municipal solid waste, waste biomass, and waste plastic. And these have been, validated with our partners. They spent over 30,000 hours of review of engineering and operational data. As I mentioned, we have feedstock flexibility, so that allows you to optimize what we call the waste basket for a specific area. So you can take the best waste for your return on the facility. Product diversity, scalability. So our facility, typically when you talk methanol, we have two different types, either 100,000 tons per year or about 250,000 tons per year. So these will be using, let's say, about 150,000 tons per year of waste, or 350,000 tons of waste. And then versatility adaptable for the different product. Business model, quite similar to technology providers. So obviously we provide the technology, we provide the proprietary equipment, and this is our technology side. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we also have a project development line. So we develop project up to financial investment decision, then we sell the project to other partners. So we have two lines of business. So obviously for us, we have making money from our license fees and for the selling for the equipment. One of the things that we've done over the last few months is we've created a partnership with Technip to allow us to accelerate the commercialization. Just to give you an idea of the pipeline that we have, as I mentioned, we have the facility in Edmonton that's been running since 2017. We've been producing methanol. We got ISCC and ISCC Plus certification. And we'll also been producing ethanol, where we had the biofuel certification from British Columbia, as well as from EPA of the US. We have a facility under construction in Montreal. So this picture is probably 2 months old. This is a project that we're doing with Shell, Suncor, and Proman, with our support from both the Quebec and the Canadian government. This is a $1.2 billion investment. We are also attached to the biorefinery. There's a 90 megawatt electrolyzer. So we're producing both hydrogen and oxygen that are being used in the process of the biorefinery. So this facility will produce about 105,000 tons per year of sustainable methanol, and it's about 85% of greenhouse gas reduction compared to the normal fuel being used. Our next project is Ecoplanta. This project is in Tarragona in Spain with our partner Repsol. This will be twice the capacity of our project in Montreal. This project is close to go to FID. We expect that to happen in the first half of this year. This project has been awarded a 106 million euro grant from the Innovation Fund. So we're very pleased with the support we're getting there. And then we're working with Dimeta. Dimeta is a new company in the LPG world. In fact, it's a joint venture between SHV and USG from the US, so the two largest distributor of LPG. They're looking at sustainable solution for LPG. So they look at the different pathways and they identify DME as a product of choice. So from methanol to DME is a very simple reaction. It's a dehydration of methanol, so it's quite simple. So that's an add-on to our normal project of methanol. So we're working with them on a project in Europe as well as in the Gulf Coast in the US. So as I mentioned, the partnership with Technip is to accelerate our deployment, but also ENERKEM, we're not an engineering company, we're not an EPC company. We had a lot of pain and suffering to build our facility in Edmonton by ourselves, and we said we wouldn't do that twice. So we were looking for good partners. And obviously these guys have a good customer base as well, and they have a lot of knowledge and technology, so they are going to help us optimize the design of our facilities. So ENERKEM will be continuing to provide technology license, equipment, and support. And then Technip will support us in concept and feasibility study, detail engineering, procurement, and fabrication. Today, our facility are all modularized, so they are shipped to the site, all fully modularized, which reduce the risk of construction, which on those projects is something you need to take care of. And also, you have the ability to pretest that, and it accelerate the construction site. So I'll switch gear a little bit, start talking a bit about the market, and I won't have to explain you on the regulatory. Tim did a great job for that, so thank you, Tim, for this, because I'm not the best at it, so it's great. So this is just to give you, kind of an overview of where gasification can play. And again, there's a different solution on the panel today, and all of the solutions are needed. So not one of them will solve it all. So I don't intend to mention that gasification is an answer to all, but it's a good solution. So as you can see, the hard-to-abate sector, obviously, when you look at chemical, marine fuel, or marine shipping, aviation, and heavy road transport, there's a big part of the global emission, and it's projected to be 40% of the global emission by 2050. If you look on the right-hand side, as you can see in the marine fuel, obviously LNG is an important solution. In the SAF, FR is also an important solution. As we saw from Tim, there's some question about LNG long-term in the net zero. That's not a solution. Bio-LNG obviously is a different story. But as you can see here, with gasification in the aviation, you can do SAF, which is gasification plus FT, or alcohol to jet, or methanol to jet. In the marine fuel, obviously, biomethanol or circular methanol is of interest. And then when you look at the chemical, methanol to ethylene, and green and circular methanol feedstock is a lot of place. So, and methanol is a building block in the chemical industry. So obviously here we're talking about transport, but the chemical industry will be looking for the same molecule at the end of the day. So we've been, 2023 has been a good year, I would say, for the biofuel industry in general, because there's been some convergence on the regulatory framework in Europe, IMO as well, and in the US as well. So that's quite encouraging. Obviously, the greenhouse gas abatement target to net zero in 2050 is crucial. Key regulation, as Tim indicated, are fostering robust demand. Also, with a more, I guess, stable environment, then you get financial support. The government are helping as well. There's contract for difference that's coming in place as well. So I won't say that financing those projects is easy, but it's easier than it was. So this is good news. And then the market are expanding. One thing that we see is that with all those demand, the waste and the residue will become a global strategic resources. So here again, I think the only maybe specific point I'd like to bring on, because I think on the Fuel EU Maritime, Tim did an outstanding job. Maybe on the Red 3, ENERKEM has been, I'm not sure what's the right term, advocacy, I guess, with the EU for a long time. But until this last emission of Red 2, or now Red 3, there was no compensation done for methane emission avoidance by using municipal solid waste in Europe. In North America, you had a credit for that. In Europe, you didn't. Now we have a credit. So what it does, it's increase even more the greenhouse gas reduction from our product. And it's quite significant in our case. And as you can see, when you're looking at the potential impact, you can have a certificate that can have 2.4 times the value on the energy level, and then RFNBO, which is renewable from non-organic basis, is even better at 3. So, with this, the sustainable methanol is having much more value on the market. So for people who have been tracking, the Maritime or the book order, you can see the growth. Sorry, the legend hasn't carried over, but the graph on the left, the blue one is, or the dark blue is the LPG. That's the LPG natural gas. And the light blue is the natural gas, and the orange one is the methanol book order. So as you can see, in 2023, methanol has been the leading new book order coming out for boat. And you see on the right-hand side, it goes mostly into the bulk carriers and container ship. So a lot of, and they're all coming, it's not like 100% methanol transport. It's what they call dual fuels, so they can use maritime gas oil and biofuels methanol. So that's quite encouraging for the future. So here, Tim has mentioned about the outlook. I just want to put that into volume, because for the methanol producer, that's what we're looking at. But looking at the volume, and one of the interesting thing is that Maritime will be looking for biofuel, but obviously SAF as well, and methanol can be an answer to both. So there's going to be a huge demand only for methanol in the marine fuel, but it's going to be the same thing on the aviation fuel. So we project that the supply of methanol in 2030 will be over 3 million tons. So that's going to be a huge volume compared to the production today. And with this, and we see that with EFA today in the SAF market, there's going to be a scarcity. So with the scarcity comes a premium. So for people that will have capacity of methanol, it's going to be a good place to be. This is just an illustration. At the end of the day, the ship owner are looking for the cheapest way to reduce their emission. Those people are smart. They buy a lot of fuel, and they're looking for the cheaper solution. So this is just to compare the different pathway. And again, this is from our analysis, it's an ENERKEM solution. But as you can see, obviously the bunker fuel and the VSLFO are not getting a very good solution, because they're not reducing a lot the greenhouse gas. When you're looking at the biomethanol, this is at this stage very competitive with LNG. Ammonia could also be very competitive, but there's question regarding the infrastructure needed around this and if it's going to go or not. But it's good solution. E-methanol is also a good solution, but it's all about hydrogen pricing, and we all have a good dream of €3 per kilogram, but it ain't here yet. It's going to take a bit of time before we get there. So what we see is that and the graph on the right is our analysis of if you blend biomethanol, that will be the reduction in cost. And this is for 2030. If you go further, 2035, 2040, the biomethanol has a lot of value. In this graph in 2030, there's a blend of about 8% of biomethanol. So it's not a huge blend rate, but it does reduce the cost, or what we call the compliance cost for the ship owner. So in summary, what do we offer is obviously we offer competitive pricing, lower cost than compliance costs, lowest cost than alternative, and there's no exposure to additional margin. And this is in the context where a customer wants to have an offtake, long-term offtake. He can get away in not being under the pressure of scarcity premium that will come in the market in the future. Price certainty, we have a facility, we build one, we're building a second one, so the pricing that we offer are very solid based on actual experience. And also we have all our supply chain for the equipment in place, and we are executing this today. Scalability, and there's no cost exposure for project development. So that's what I had to offer today. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis, very much. I think we can clearly say, snapshot view today, a success story, ENERKEM. And now with your partnership with Technip, I think we can hope to see that, and you expect to see, I'm sure, also the rollout program now in the future. Exactly. And I'm sure our other panelists, excuse me, I'm sure our other panelists also will. It's encouraging to see how a company like ENERKEM can establish itself in quite a short space of time. And we all hope that in future years you'll also be showing slides with large-scale projects coming through. So before we pass to the next speaker, I'd like to invite you to, if you have a question for Denis, now is your opportunity. Do we have a question? Not immediately. Oh, yes, we do.
Hello. Yep, I have 3 short ones. First of all, what are you injecting in the gasifier for heat and fluidization? 2, how do you control the gas module for, let's say, methanol synthesis? And 3, do you see any synergy for combining gasification with electrolysis, in the sense that you have hydrogen for adjusting module and produce oxygen, I guess, for the gasifier?
Okay, I'll try to remember the 3 questions, but 3 very good questions. Appreciate the question. And I would say in the gasification, we don't inject anything except oxygen into the process. So there is no external energy coming in. So what we have is we're using a mix of oxygen and steam for the fluidization agent, and then the oxygen is used for the reaction as well. So there's no external heat coming in. The third question regarding electrolysis, for sure, that's a great match. This is what we have in our Montreal project. So we're using both 100% of the hydrogen produced and 100% of the oxygen produced into the gasification system. So what it does, it doubles the production, because you don't have to shift some of the CO to hydrogen. So it doubled the production of the methanol for about the same capacity, but you need to have good electricity price. In Canada, we're quite fortunate. Like in Quebec, it's 99% renewable energy, and it's I'm sorry to tell you guys, but it's about like what is it, 30 euros per kilowatt compared, so it's about half of the price in Europe. So that's a good match. And it allows us also to, to improve the business model for the electrolyzer, because now you sell both molecules. So that's quite important. Sorry, I missed the second question. Okay, so, the only thing that we need to do in the gasification process is to produce CO and hydrogen, and then to clean it. And then, depending of how much hydrogen you have, you can also play with the CO2 to produce e-methanol in the process. So our methanol process is same as any industrial process. So we're converting those 3 molecules into methanol. We're adjusting the ratio for maximum conversion efficiency. So that's it. That's all we do.
Okay, thank you. Denis, a last final question, maybe someone? Okay, thank you very much, Denis. So now I'd like to invite Jesper, NOES R&D Manager at Stiesdal, to come and take to the stage. And Stiesdal is a company we've been talking to for a few years and following them a little bit in the background. And this year they said, yes, we want to come and tell the world what we're doing. So it was a very exciting moment. So over to you, Jesper. Tell us all.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about an alternative to LNG and methanol and ammonia if it succeeds.
Jesper, thank you very much indeed. So now I would like to invite Jesper KNUDSEN of RAMBOLL, a Danish company. Jesper is head of business of biofuels, to tell us all about methanol and
yes.
all your involvement in
Yes,
maritime
thank
sector.
you.
Thank you.
Yep. So I will talk a little bit about the green methanol today. So methanol being the topic here in the maritime session. Just very briefly on RAMBOLL. RAMBOLL is an independent engineering and consultancy company, founded and located headquarters in Denmark. We are around 18,000 people dispersed in 35 countries around the world, with some strongholds in Europe and North America, and also Southeast Asia, Australia, within all sorts of engineering topics you can think of. So buildings, transport, energy, where I'm from, environmental and health, and also classic management consulting, as you also know from the consultancy world. Fully independent engineering consultancy, owned by a foundation and a little bit by the employees as well, but fully independent. I always like to start with this one here because so we are talking a lot about aviation and talking about shipping and what to do to decarbonize and also defossilize these two industries. But if you look at it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, they're actually only a tiny bit of the whole picture. Although they are of course important, but you have a lot of other things, especially amongst energy-intensive industries, where you also have some low-hanging fruits that you maybe should also put all your time and efforts into, than just looking in aviation and shipping. And just to mention that sometimes putting that into that perspective helps you navigate around this whole landscape of doing greenhouse gas emission reductions. But we are talking about aviation and shipping. Aviation yesterday, shipping today. So what are the kind of targets? So Tim, you already gone through all this. So this is the basically the same thing as you have shown. So we have Refuel EU around aviation. So in this is about volumetric SAF targets. So by 2050, the aviation is looking into 70% of their fuel being SAF. Fuel EU Maritime is talking about not volumetric fuel targets, but greenhouse gas intensity reduction targets, so 80% by 2050. This is not only around the fuel, it's basically from what they call well to wake, which is the whole process from fuel production and delivery to using it on board the ship. That's why they're looking for the 80% reduction. And putting things a little bit into perspective, because this is also some of my goal for this presentation, is to kind of show you what we are up against. So SAF, yesterday we talked about SAF, but just to mention that currently we burn 300 million tons per year of jet fuel, and 0.1% of that is today SAF. So if you want to reach 70% in 2050, we have a long way to go. The same thing with shipping. If you want to, let's say you substituted all the fuels consumed today with methanol, you would need around more than 500 million tons of green methanol per year. And today, the capacity today is 0.5 million tons. Again, just putting things into a little bit of perspective. But methanol is a molecule that is something that the maritime industry can make a lot of use of to substitute their fuels. Methanol is something we know well today. It's a precursor for a lot of things we're using today. Everything around us comes from the chemical industry, more or less, and methanol is the starting point for many of these processes. It's also easy to transport and it's easy to store, so that's why it's of course interesting for a ship to have methanol. Ammonia is also a very good thing. We have all these safety issues around ammonia that needs to be solved first. Today, methanol is produced globally in the amount of around 110 million tons of methanol per year. And all that methanol is made by only maybe 100 large-scale natural gas-based plants. These plants are big. They are more than 2,000 tons per day plants. Some of them are really big. There's a handful or more, a little bit more, of plants that makes 5,000 tons per day methanol. And technology suppliers, they can actually build them in 10,000 tons per day plants, single plants. That's a lot of methanol made by just one plant per day. So I wanted just to take you through a little bit of a technology school around methanol. How do you produce it today, and what are the sort of alternatives in the future? We have already heard a little bit about how we can do it from ENERKEM and Stiesdal. We'll hear more from OFT. But today, a methanol plant, the heart of the methanol plant is the back end. So a methanol plant consists of a front end and a back end. The front end is where you generate the syngas, and the back end is where you generate the methanol. So what goes into the back end is the syngas, as we already touched a little bit upon. So the syngas consists of CO, CO2, and hydrogen, and it has to be in a certain ratio, these three elements. Otherwise, you have not the biggest yield of methanol synthesis across the synthesis reactor. In the synthesis reactor, you have a catalyst, a methanol catalyst, and it helps. That's where you have the chemical magic taking place, where you convert the syngas into a methanol molecule. Only around 50, maybe 20% of the gas going in is actually converted into methanol, because there's an equilibrium equation going on in the synthesis reactor. So we have to recycle the last 85% to go into the reactor again, and then you put in some fresh gas through the makeup gas line. And then you can separate out the methanol and distill that into your AA grade methanol. So this is a traditional back end. What you then do in those many of those commercial plants I mentioned before, you have a front end where you feed in natural gas. A lot of natural gas, and you clean it. You have your feed gas cleaning, and then you do your standard, you could say, steam reforming. So you through various processes, it can be a one-step or two-step reforming. You get your CO, CO2, and your hydrogen in the right ratio, the module, and you let that into the back end. This is a traditional methanol plant, and it's worth commenting on this here also that this is everybody out here in this room, in the panel, who are doing a green energy transition in liquid fuels and making methanol. This is basically what you're up against. This is the methanol plant that has been, to me as an engineer, I'm an engineer by heart. This plant here is this is a magical factory. I mean, this is the chemistry and the process technology taking place in here is just fantastic. And the advantage of this industry, of these plants, is that they have been able to refine and make better all the things around it the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. For example, the catalyst in the synthesis reactor, if you can gain just 1, maybe 0.5% extra catalytic activity, it means, because of the high process flows you have through these plants, it means maybe millions of euros straight down to the bottom line per year for these plants. So they have put a lot of effort. I come from a Danish company that is producing and making these catalysts, so a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort has gone into to developing these and optimizing these the catalyst and the process to really have energy efficient plants. So the disadvantage of these plants is, of course, it's fed with natural gas, fossil natural gas. So we need to do things differently. We keep the back ends, more or less the back ends. So you still want to make the methanol, of course, so we keep that. But we need to change the front end of these plants. So this is this is very simplified. Of course, a lot of nuances to all this, but this is roughly how it takes place in an e-methanol plant, e-fuels. So you have your feed in. This is not natural gas anymore. Now it's renewable energy in the form of green electrons. It is carbon dioxide, and hopefully it will be biogenic carbon dioxide. Then you have a reverse water gas shift because you need this module for the syngas before you need the right stoichiometry of the syngas before it enters into the back end. So you need to convert some of the CO2 into CO. That is a energy consuming steps, but you need to have it. So you have CO and CO2 and hydrogen in the syngas. So this is the e-methanol. A lot of talk has been around e-fuels and hydrogen these days and years. But there are some challenges here. We touched a little bit upon it yesterday, especially the bottom one, biogenic CO2. So a lot of talk, a lot of discussions and conferences and so on has been around the hydrogen and how to produce it. But just as important, at least when you're making hydrocarbons, is the carbon. Where is that going to come from? It must be biogenic. So where is that going to come from? For example, you can do carbon capture from a biomass-fired power plant. It can be the CO2 from the biogas plant and so on. But there's going to be a lot of competition on CO2 in the future. There's all these supply chain issues as well around hydrogen electrolyzers. You don't really have any suppliers of electrolysis today that can supply you gigawatt scale electrolysis on a continuous basis. That is also something that's been built up. It's going to take time. If you want to make these big plants, methanol plants, let's say 2,500 metric tons per day methanol plant, you actually need at least 1 gigawatt electrolyzer. That is a lot, especially if you want to build 100 plants of these. So there's a supply chain there. Then there's the water, maybe more of a local kind of issue. 1 kilo of hydrogen requires 9 kilos of water to produce. Then on top of that, you have all the cooling water and all sorts of other streams that you need water to. So where is that water going to come from? And of course, there's the renewable energy itself, the wind turbines, the solar panels. You will have a competition with energy-intensive industries where you can use the electricity much better by electrifying, for example, cement, steel industry, and so on. So a lot of things is up in the air, where to use our scarce resources the best. Then you have, of course, as we're talking about a lot now, the biomethanol route. And here I focused on biomass gasification. So instead of burning the same wood in a boiler, in a power plant, biomass-fired power plant, you could gasify the same biomass, where you then generate the same syngas, hydrogen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Yesterday we talked about, do you need to put in hydrogen in the system? Which is the answer is, of course, yes, you do. One of the ways to do it is doing the tar reform, the tar from the gasifier, you reform that into hydrogen and CO. You can also take out the CO2, the carbon capture on your gas, and then use that CO2 for something else, e-fuels, for example. But the much better idea is basically to combine the things. So from the gasification, you already have the carbon and hydrogen in your syngas. In my opinion, the best way is to just add extra hydrogen so you get the right stoichiometry into the back end. And then, as in ENERKEM mentioned, you utilize the oxygen in the gasification processes. You have these synergies between technologies. This, in my opinion, this is a bio-e-methanol plant. In my opinion, this is the way to go, because this is where you get the most sort of use of your resources. And you get synergies between various technologies. You don't just talk about hydrogen production and e-methanol, and then you have biofuels on the other side. But here you actually get them to work together in an efficient plant. So just a little bit on gasification. We have heard a lot about it already, but I will just mention a little bit more. So gasification is not a new thing. We have known this for decades, but it has been coal that has been gasified. It's not something we have known so much about in Europe, worked so much about but in China, for example, the millions of tons of ammonia produced each year, a third of that is actually produced in China. China is the biggest ammonia producer in the world. They don't have any natural gas, but they have coal. So they gasified coal for many years. So gasification is a well-known process, but gasification of biomass is, as I'm sure ENERKEM will also agree with, it's a whole different thing than gasifying coal. So we have all sorts of issues coming into it that we need to address. And as you can see on this diagram, there's not really been done much in biomass gasification globally. There's not really been any incentive to do it, really, to develop it, but there is now. And just to mention where gasification and pyrolysis, various types of pyrolysis, they sort of fit in. It's kind of the same sort of story. At the top of the heap is combustion. Enough oxygen, enough heat, then you just burn everything. But then you start to sort of work your way down to less oxygen, less heat, and you go through these processes. And depending on what your end goal is, what your end product is, then you can optimize it. And I think we heard from Stiesdal, and we hear from OFT later on how you can do it to optimize these various things. It can be liquids, gas, oils, and so on. But if you want to have a syngas, then gasification is probably the best way to go to use your sustainable biomass. Yes, and then just very briefly, we also talked a lot about this. Gasification is not new, but there are a lot of challenges in gasifying biomass. We talked also yesterday about especially the tars and the ash, for example, in gasification in a gasifier. It's something that needs to be developed, but it will come. We were there also many years ago when it came to other technologies, and now they've been refined to highly energy efficient plants. So we will get there as well, I'm sure. Just a little bit about what RAMBOLL then can offer. So depending on where you are in your project, we can support you in any of these stages. It could be from the very conceptual phase where you are basically just trying to find out what to do with the feedstock. Pre-feasibility study, is it actually feasible what you have in mind? And then go further on to basic engineering, detail engineering, funneling down your CAPEX, OPEX models and so on until you reach a final investment decision. And then when you need to start building an actual plant, construction and commissioning, we can act as an EPCM, doing all the integration of different technology packages, for example, from the people here on the panel. Balance and plant, making sure that the project management is controlled, doing all sort of design review if it's an owner engineer job or something like that. So we can support you in many of these things. And before you actually get to do any engineering, there's the classic management consulting exercises you need to go through as well. Where in the world do you want to put your first plant? You need to narrow down a region, maybe even a country, location in that particular country, where is your business case gonna have the best benefit, where to build your first plant, basically. And we do that when we finally get into a project. We do that through a strict project model, where we have certain stages where you go through in close collaboration with the client and the project owner. We also put in here some, you could say, bus stops on sustainability, where we try to, together with the client, go into this whole circularity and sustainability discussion. Where are you in that journey, and how can we implement that so that you've come out with a product and a project and a plant that you can also actually call sustainable. This being my summary slide, it's not really a kind of a summary slide at all, but it's kind of showing you, as we also talked about, how this technology landscape looked like. So we can talk about gasification policies, we can talk about electrolysis. At the end of the day, we are talking about the same molecule. We are working towards the same molecule. And resources are scarce, whether it being green electron or sustainable biomass. So we need to sort of make sure that we make the best use of it and make use of the waste streams coming from different technologies, put them together, not just looking at gasification and not just looking at hydrogen electrolysis, but putting them together to kind of make the most energy efficient and optimum operating plant. So I think this is the kind of space where we all are trying to navigate, and it's quite good to hear that. I'm sure a year from now, when we hear from ENERKEM and Stiesdal and OFT again, there will be a lot of progress into this space. That was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesper. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to be a little reminder there for us all. It's like reality check that whilst we have on the stage here some really exciting and forward-thinking and innovative solutions for the future, there are also established players in this market. Yes. They're not going to just want to put their hands in there and say game over. They're also going to, and as you showed us, the front end is what they're focusing on now to defossilize that part of their supply chain. But the future, I think, will enable everybody to have some action in this area. So, but of course, there are people who are going to. These other people are going to want to still stay in business, clearly. So, are there any questions from the floor? Yes, we have a question here, please.
Hi. Since you have a great engineering background about designing this conversion pathway from the biomass to renewable fuel, what do you have solution for biomass with high potassium percentage, like 6% potassium? Did you face this issue before? Because the biomass is not the same everywhere.
Yes. That's true. You are getting very specific now, I would say. So I from the top of my head, I can't answer that. I'll be happy to speak to about that later, about potassium in particular in the biomass. But it's true. And this is why it's so easy to talk about, for example, e-fuels, because it's so easy to understand. We have a wind turbine, electrolysis, and then hydrogen, and then methanol. So the back end of the methanol plant is just one catalytic reactor, and that's it, really. That's easy to understand for everybody. But once you went into biomass and biomass conversion, the complexity just increases because you have so many different types of biomass. So what is the best solution?
Usually the biomass, there is above ground biomass and underground biomass. So the underground biomass, in generally, they have high potassium percentage. So this particularity challenge is very interested to be solved at earlier stage, because it will open the door widely for different kind of biomass.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Dennis, do you want to say something to that, or
yeah, those feedstock are challenging, but there are solutions. In gasification, you can process those products, but you need to take some special care in the reactor, but you can process those. But they're tricky. They are tricky.
When you do pyrolysis, it's you can actually go higher in these ash contents because you don't go high in temperature, you don't get ash agglomeration, and the potassium or other stuff stays in the biochar. So that is actually a way forward.
Okay, thank you. Interesting perspectives. Is there another question? One more question, maybe? Okay. Thank you very much, Jesper. Thank you very much indeed. So now I'm going to ask Jens of Organic Fuel Technology to come and take the stage and to open the black box of microwave cracking technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thanks for inviting me. I think there might have been maybe it's a coincidence, but there seems to be an organizing principle here that you have sort of a quite mature technology in ENERKEM, you have a maturing technology with Stiesdal, and then you have a young technology still, but which is maturing rapidly. So I'm going to, we're not quite as far as the other two technology companies here, but we're moving forward fast. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing and where we're heading. So we're a technology startup. Actually, I think that as far as I remember, I don't think it's covered by any NDA by now, but Jesper KNUDSEN was actually a part of a technical due diligence process a couple of years ago where we raised new capital. So, so it's a small world. But we raised new capital in 2022, and since then we've been taking some pretty fast and significant step forwards on the basis of a technology where we convert biomass to bio oil and biochar with microwaves, microwave cracking as we call it. And in many ways it's comparable to pyrolysis, but then again not. But based on that, equipped with that unique technology that is patented in various ways, we've set out to make a contribution to make organic waste valuable and create circular biofuels that will limit global warming, and also at the same time solve some major waste problems. So that's basically the challenge we've set ourselves. Opening up the black box a little bit, what is the idea? Well, what is the core of our technology? It's the reactor system that we've developed, where we use so-called monomode microwaves to create a controlled process in which various biomaterials are cracked to bio gas and biochar. And bio-oil can, as you know, all of you by now, be used to displace fossil fuels. Biochar can be used for carbon storage. And since virtually the whole process that we have developed is driven by renewable energy, electrical power, the climate impact is the net climate impact is quite positive from the way we work. We all know microwaves from our kitchen microwave. We don't use kitchen microwaves. We've developed and patented this reactor that applies monomode microwaves, that is parallel and uniform microwaves, which ensures an entirely uniform heating. So this offers a high energy effectiveness and uniform process parameters. At the same time, the use of monomode microwave in our microwave reactor chamber creates a strong electromagnetic field that alternates very rapidly, and this catalyzes bond breaking. So this is why we actually sometimes call it pyrolysis on speed, or pyrolysis version 2.0. We speed up the cracking process with the use of this electromagnetic field. And this generates some significant advantages as we see it. Since we use electrical power, preferably from renewable sources, to drive virtually the whole process, then we actually have what could be compared to a power-to-X technology here, using electricity to create a wavelength which is used to create biofuels. And this also entails that we have here a very efficient carbon utilization. We don't use the carbon, or not very much of it, very little of it in the process itself. To drive the process, we use the electrical power as the external energy source. And this is what makes it possible for us to talk about a new power-to-X pathway, actually. And the microwave cracking process itself, as I mentioned, I referred to it as pyrolysis 2.0 or pyrolysis on speed. So this actually means that it produces a high share of oil compared to conventional slow pyrolysis, at least up to more than 4% of the mass is an output in form of oil. And this is notably done at a quite low temperature between 325 and 375 degrees. So this is evidence that we actually accelerate the process. And then the carbon storage from the biochar is also validated by the fact that we have a high degree of stability in the biochar. And finally, it's the process that is carried out at atmospheric pressure, so we don't need to take care of or handle high pressure piping or anything like that. We might talk of ourselves as the little brother of Stiesdal. Actually, we move in the slipstream of Stiesdal. They've developed this microwave cracking technology over a number of years in lab scale at small scale pilot plants, and at a fully functioning pilot plant, which with a capacity of about half a megawatt, if you want to count it in that way. So we're right now in the final preparatory stages of starting the construction of our first full-scale construction plant, which will have a capacity of 6 12 kilowatt microwave generators and a 400 kilogram of dry matter per hour. We're focusing on wastewater sludge, because this is a waste handling technology as much as it's a biofuel and biocarbon technology process. So this first facility will have a capacity of around 10,000 tons of sludge per year, which will generate about 1,200 tons of oil and 1,200 tons of biochar. And the core of this facility is this facility. This installation. 3 microwave ovens, each with a double microwave reactor within it. So we have 6 times 12 kilowatt microwave capacity going into these reactor ovens. And as you can see, it's a modular design. You can expand the production capacity of this facility by adding more reactor ovens. The ovens and the reactors as such cannot be increased. It's a fixed size, and it's driven by the availability of microwave generator capacity, microwave generators in the market. So we're using the largest one that is industrially available, the 12 kilowatt magnetron. And a brief look at the process flow. So what we've demonstrated at our pilot plant is the core process itself, the microwave cracking at a certain temperature, and with the condensing of the gaseous oil to oil, and the handling of the biochar. But what we aim to do what we're going to do with the full-scale plant that is now being set for construction is to illustrate or to demonstrate the system integration from the reception of biomass to the handling of bio-oil and biochar at a scale which is relevant for instance, a municipal wastewater treatment plant. And so this also means that we have had certain design drivers in this process that have been more important than others. Drying, first of all, we need to dry down the biomass, and we can handle in our microwave processor, or microwave reactor, we can handle biomass with a certain humidity, 5 or 10%, say, but it's not a smart solution. You want to use the microwave energy to crack the material, not to evaporate water. Or crack crack water. So that is. So it's business-wise, and technology-wise, it's a better solution to remove all the water as far as you can do it before then. And the second design driver that has been applied in this process is that we want to use electrical power to sort of focus in on the one of the competitive advantages of our technology, that we can use electrical power throughout the process. So what we've decided for is a step 1 drying process, which is driven by heat pumps, and a step 2 drying process, which is driven by the relatively small and relatively uninteresting amount of gas that we are not condensing. So in total, we remove all the water through these processes before the material enters the microwave reactors, and then we condense the bio-oil, the gaseous oil in the condenser tower to generate bio-oil. Also, as Stiesdal, have a little bit of information of our oil with us today. So it's interesting oil in terms of fractions, viscosity and stability. It's relatively stable. Much oil in the diesel and heavy fuel fractions. And we're in the same on the same pathway as Stiesdal is in this respect. We're looking at the maritime sector as an off-taker channel, as blend-in in bunker fuel or in methanol possibly. And we're also looking at ways to upgrade it, hydrotreating and other ways for high-end usage. And this is, and we're also here on the same page as you are in Stiesdal. It's not our core process, it's not our core interest, what you actually do to arrive at a good oil. We want to use the most efficient, or the most simple way to post-process the oil to make it available for the market. But we're also looking into how you can arrive at high-end usages. The question of all this being energy efficiency and economics. GreenLab is in Skive, where we will be constructing this first plant. It offers some interesting synergies and symbiosis. We can make use of some surplus heat from other partners in the sector, in the GreenLab facility, and it's obviously also a very interesting exposition window, where a number of Power-to-X and pyrolysis companies are located already. So it's turning into become a very attractive and well-visited exposition site. And we'll hopefully also have some cooperation with Stiesdal also on practical terms on this site. So it also means that sludge needs to be transported to this facility, but from nearby wastewater treatment plants. It would be also an option to place this facility close to or in the proximity of a wastewater treatment plant, but we've chosen this option because of the exposition value and also because of the surplus heat and other symbiosis possibilities that we find in this park. Looking forward, we will be offering this facility as a product and including a servicing of it. And most customers are likely to also be interested in us handling the products, biochar and bio-oil. So that's also going to become a part of the offering. The biomass right now is, as I mentioned, wastewater sludge, but but we are relatively robust in terms of materials that we can process. The main thing being that we have to have a relatively high polarity of the materials. So there has to be an electronegativity that makes it possible for this electromagnetic field to make its working on the material. So simple plastics, for instance, that's not something we can do, but rubber, an organic material, and other forms of biomass straw is certainly also an option. We've chosen to go for sludge in the first phase, as this is not only a biofuel production technology, a carbon storage technology, it's also a waste handling technology. So we aim to actually hit 3 problems in one go: circular fuel, carbon storage, and waste handling. What is our short-term focus? Well, just as Stiesdal was talking about, we are working on optimizing the path from our oil condensate to attractive maritime fuels, looking at the ISO 8217 standards and ways to arrive at these standards. Not necessarily all of the parameters, but enough of the parameters so that we can blend it without causing any trouble. And we've achieved already some encouraging results in terms of humidity and solids and acid numbers. But more work is needed there, and I think also, Tim, in relation to your presentation, I think your standards, the way you are working with standards with your clients, is, as I understand it, mostly focused on the greenhouse gas impacts. How green are these fuels really? How can we validate how green they are? But seen from our perspective, I'm sure Stiesdal would also agree, it would be interesting if the sector could also work with sort of the more technical specification of the oils that are relevant for maritime use, since it seems to us that some of the parameters that have been decided in or set down in, for instance, the ISO 8217 standards are sort of habits from older times where you had different kinds of engines and so on. So that would not necessarily need to be applied to biofuels, but that's something we could discuss afterwards, maybe. I think I see a need for that, at least if you want to. You may want to lower the barriers a little bit for biofuels in various respects in order to achieve one overriding objective, namely reducing the greenhouse gas contents of maritime fuels. So that would be one call to the sector to work also towards that objective, to sort of make the value chain ends meet each other's in a good way. And we'll certainly be playing our part to engage with the maritime sector in that respect. We're also working with the refinery sector to, and I see a need for the value chain to bend towards each other's. It's clear that the refinery sector is accustomed to large volumes of homogeneous material, and their investment plans are shaped according to this. But biofuels offer a higher variety of qualities of oil and lower quantities, lower volumes, at least initially. And this is a traditional chicken and egg problem that the whole sector is facing. But we need to we need all the stakeholders to work together to arrive at a value chain that is workable also for pyrolysis oils such as ours. And then, of course, our focus will be to achieve economies of scale and volume with our technology. We know it's working, but we need to demonstrate it at a scaled-up facility first, and also to achieve economies of scale looking forward, because we're building a prototype, and this prototype is, of course, more expensive than it needs to be in the future when we're entering into serial production. So that's what I had to offer today.
Thank you, Jens, very much.
And we have a stand over at the Danish pavilion, so if you want to discuss more, you're very welcome to pop by.
Thank you, Jens. I was very pleased to hear you reaching out there in the name of bio-oil and pyrolysis and microwave technology sector, because that's the whole thinking behind putting together these conferences here for these 2 days, is to try and bridge the gap, or bring together players who traditionally haven't been looking to talk to each other, and now the need is to defossilize shipping and aviation yesterday. So it's the whole concept behind is to bring the world, the people like you who are new players into the market, and the other panelists on the stage, and to connect you with the off-takers, and so that you can talk and work out how this could all be constructed to favourably enable you to grow and contribute more. So I'm pleased to hear you taking advantage of that opportunity to reach out to the other parts of the value chain, as you said. So that's just a little remark so thank you for doing that. Would anybody like to ask a question to Jens? Yes, we have one question from Maria.
Hi, it's Maria Puig from RAMBOLL, and I wanted to ask, how are you going to deal with the smells on the drying steps before your microwave reactor?
How are we going to deal with it?
With the smells, with the odor.
The odor, yes. Well, we're contracting with a cooperation partner as for the step 1 dryer. So it's actually a sludge dryer that has already been developed, and it's a closed system. And the same
so you
goes.
Haven't developed that part yourself?
We haven't developed that. We're focusing on our core process as far as possible. We need to design various subsystems ourselves, unfortunately, but we're drawing in specialists in those fields. So our core competence is really the microwave processing system, but the smell from the drying system will be handled in the form of closed systems with only irregular outputs of odor, and then of course also we will be ventilating the facility. So.
Hi. Okay. I have two questions. The one thing, good thing about the microwave oil, that the pH is between 6 and 6.6, which is very good. But what is the percentage of the electricity cost in the production cost of the microwave oil, and whether you are able to scale up to the level of, let's say, 100 tons per hour? Are you able to scale the microwave device up to 100 tons per hour?
The first question, as far as I understand it, is the drivers of the production costs. Is that yeah. Yeah, the main driver is actually electricity cost. The way we've decided to design the process. So we need relatively low electricity prices from renewable sources for this to make very good sense. But in that respect, we don't differ from other power to X technologies, I think. So. Well, the business cases, we have various business case scenarios, but the main business case scenario departs from an assumption of electricity prices around the ones we see right now. So it's not that we assume that the electricity prices will be halved before it can generate a profit. So
but it's not a matter of the price. But I'm saying that as cost from the production cost today is 60, 70, like power to X is 65% in this range. Yeah, and the cost of the hydrogen, because this is the main
composition cost. The composition of the costs. Is that what you're talking about? Yes. Well, we're so fortunate that wastewater sludge is a negative cost. This is also part of the driver of the business case, that it's a problem that needs to be handled. So our business model rests on incomes from expenses for primarily electricity. That's the main point, and incomes from the sale of oil, biochar certificates, and wastewater sludge handling also. So, whether you ask, are there other cost components? Yes, there are, of course, but I can't remember the specific distribution. But at this point.
building on the electricity question, when you rely that much on renewables, do you have an option to be intermittent in the way you run it? That you, for one or two of the electricity-dependent steps, that you pause them when the power is too expensive?
Well, we can be intermittent in the sense that we can turn down the capacity of the production, the capacity of the whole plant. So we can turn down the effect actually sent into the microwave generators. That's the way we can do it. So, but we cannot switch to other power sources. You need electricity to drive the microwave processing process. That's a given. So. And getting back to one question I forgot to answer from you, the scalability. Well, there are some restrictions on that right now. We can add more ovens, more reactors to the production line, but we cannot make a reactor that is 10 times the size that we can right now. That depends on the size of the magnetron that the industry will be able to deliver. And I think that's also developing quite rapidly, but right now we're using the largest one that is available. So if you have a 24 kilowatt magnetron in some years, then you can make a reactor that is double the size we have right now.
Okay, thank you, Jens, very much indeed. So now I'd like to invite Marion GUILLEVIC to the stage. Well, you're on the stage, to the microphone. Marion is Business Development Director of a French startup company by the name of ENERGO, who recently have raised some capital and are now therefore on a trajectory, but Marion will tell us more about that. But what we're going to have now is also another completely new way of looking at this and a new pathway which completes the panel and this. Well, I'll let Marion tell us more.
Thank you very much. So sorry, my presentation will be in French. Sorry, guys. I will make two presentations today. Je ferai deux présentations aujourd'hui. Une vraiment plus sur la technologie et une deuxième plutôt orientée producteurs de biogaz. Donc c'est une vraie solution à destination des producteurs de biogaz et méthanisateurs agricoles, etc. Alors, quelques mots sur ENERGO. Donc, ENERGO, c'est une start-up qui a été créée en 2018 pour porter une technologie de plasma catalyse développée au sein des laboratoires de Chimie Paris. Donc, c'est une technologie française, fabriquée en France. On fabrique nos propres réacteurs et nos propres catalyseurs. Nous avons été labellisés Solar Impulse cette année. Nous faisons partie de la French Tech, French Fab et de la communauté du coq vert. Et nous avons eu la chance d'être sélectionnés pour faire partie de la première promotion French Tech 2030 dans le cadre de France 2030 cet été. Donc nous venons de finaliser récemment, donc en décembre, une levée de fonds de 12 millions d'euros qui vise à financer entre autres nos outils de production, mais également notre montée en compétences et notre première industrielle l'année prochaine. Nous sommes une entreprise innovante. Nous avons déjà 8 brevets à notre actif sur différentes applications que je mentionnerai brièvement. Nous nous sommes fait connaître en 2021 par l'installation d'un démonstrateur de méthanation sur un site de méthanisation agricole. On est venu valoriser le CO2 issu de la production de biogaz par addition d'hydrogène pour venir produire du méthane de synthèse. En juillet 2022, nous avons été la première entreprise française à injecter du méthane de synthèse dans le réseau GRDF avec la collaboration d'Engie. Nous avions bénéficié à l'époque d'une autorisation exceptionnelle de la CRE. Depuis lors, nous continuons à développer nos applications avec toujours une ambition commune, c'est-à-dire apporter une solution de décarbonation compacte, peu énergivore, nécessitant peu d'investissement. L'idée, c'est vraiment de créer des écosystèmes énergétiques dans une logique d'économie circulaire et de permettre une décarbonation décentralisée du territoire. Alors, qu'est-ce que la technologie ENERGO ? J'ai rentré un peu plus dans le détail. Donc, c'est la combinaison de deux technologies qui sont déjà matures d'un point de vue industriel. D'un côté, on va avoir la technologie du plasma, qu'on va retrouver dans tout ce qui est traitement de l'eau, dans les ozoneurs, par exemple. De l'autre côté, la technologie de la catalyse hétérogène, qui est déjà mature et bien connue dans le domaine du raffinage, avec tout ce qui est hydrotraitement, hydrocraquage, etc. L'innovation d'ENERGO, c'est vraiment la combinaison de ces deux technologies. Donc, qu'est-ce qui va se passer concrètement? C'est qu'on va venir faire passer un gaz sur un catalyseur qui, lui, est soumis au plasma. Le gaz va passer sous un état ionisé, ce qui va accroître la réactivité de la molécule. Et conséquence de cela, on a besoin de beaucoup moins de catalyseurs que dans les technologies conventionnelles. Il y a 2 études indépendantes qui ont été menées à l'époque sur la méthanation qui ont montré qu'on avait besoin de 50 à 100 fois moins de catalyseurs que dans les technologies conventionnelles. Conséquence de cela, on a des réacteurs qui sont vraiment très compacts, très petits, des boîtes à chaussures. Deuxième intérêt également, toujours du fait du plasma, on opère sur des conditions opératoires très favorables. En termes de température, on va se situer entre 200 et 300 degrés et on fonctionne à pression atmosphérique. La technologie est également très résistante à toute forme de polluant. Alors par polluant, j'entends l'eau, l'air, l'azote, les BTX tels que les benzènes, mais également tout ce qui est COV, donc les composés organiques volatiles. Finalement, tous ces polluants-là vont être dissociés à la surface du catalyseur sous l'action du plasma. Et l'intérêt, c'est que ça permet de réduire les besoins de pré-traitement en amont du réacteur, voire de supprimer complètement certaines briques de pré-traitement. Donc ça contribue finalement à la diminution globale du CAPEX de l'unité. Notre ambition, comme je l'ai mentionné, c'est vraiment de proposer une décarbonation décentralisée, de favoriser l'économie circulaire. On va se positionner sur des gammes de débit allant de 50 normomètres cubes par heure en entrée de réacteur à 10 000 normomètres cubes par heure. L'idée, c'est vraiment de positionner la technologie au plus près des émetteurs ou au plus près des utilisateurs des molécules finales. Au plus près des émetteurs, ça va être situé au plus près des émetteurs de CO2, au plus près des producteurs de biogaz et au plus près des utilisateurs des molécules finales telles que le méthanol, le sujet d'aujourd'hui, ou encore par exemple l'hydrogène. Donc nous en sommes déjà à 8 brevets sur différentes applications, parce que pour simplifier à l'extrême, en fonction des gaz qu'on met dans ce réacteur et du catalyseur que l'on choisit pour cela, il y a plusieurs réactions qui vont être possibles, donc on va se positionner sur différents marchés. Le premier marché, c'est le marché de l'hydrogène, avec 2 applications. La première, c'est le craquage d'ammoniac, qui permet de produire de l'hydrogène. Le deuxième, c'est le réformage de biogaz, donc je vais parler aujourd'hui, et le reformage à la vapeur de méthane. On va se positionner également sur la chaîne de valeur du méthane, avec la méthanation, donc production de méthane de synthèse à partir de CO2 et d'hydrogène. Ensuite, on se positionne sur tout ce qui est biocarburant, le sujet d'aujourd'hui avec de la production de biométhanol, et également sur les chaînes de valeur de e-carburant avec une brique technologique telle que la reverse water gas shift, où on est en mesure de produire du syngas à partir de CO2 et d'hydrogène. Alors, on va faire un focus sur la production de biométhanol à partir de biogaz. Donc, comment on fait ça? Donc, on va venir prendre le biogaz, qui est un mélange de méthane et de CO2, en général en proportion 60-40, 50-50, ça dépend des productions. Et via une première brique de réformage à sec, donc avec le réacteur de plasma catalyse, on va venir produire un syngas, donc composé de CO et d'hydrogène. Ce syngas, on va l'envoyer dans un réacteur de méthanolation pour venir produire du biométhanol. L'intérêt de cela, c'est que ça permet d'avoir une production décentralisée avec une solution, comme je l'ai mentionné, compacte, peu énergivore, peu d'investissement. On va vraiment venir positionner notre conteneur directement sur le site de méthanisation ou en tout cas le site de producteur de biogaz. Ça permet, un intérêt surtout, c'est de valoriser du biogaz, donc sous état gazeux, sous la forme d'une molécule liquide, donc qui est facilement exportable. Molécules liquides avec un marché en forte demande, comme ça a été mentionné tout à l'heure. L'intérêt pour les méthaniseurs en particulier, c'est que ça permet également une diversification des revenus. Aujourd'hui, les méthanisations agricoles fonctionnent sur 2 business models classiques. Le premier, c'est la cogénération, donc production d'électricité à partir de biogaz. Le deuxième, c'est l'injection de méthane. Donc on va venir prendre le biogaz, on l'épure, on injecte le méthane et le CO2, il faut bien trouver quoi en faire. Donc c'est vraiment une solution qui permet de diversifier les revenus avec finalement la production d'une molécule à forte valeur ajoutée. Aujourd'hui, le biométhanol, le marché, c'est 1 200 €, 1 300 € la tonne. Et c'est surtout que ça permet finalement, ça adresse une cible particulièrement intéressante, c'est toutes les méthanisations en fin de contrat de cogénération qui doivent trouver une solution pour l'après-contrat. Ça cible aussi également tous les sites finalement biogaz qui ne voient pas le jour parce que finalement, ce n'est pas économiquement viable de tirer un pipe pour raccorder la méthanisation au réseau de gaz. C'est également une solution très pertinente pour tout industriel qui veut valoriser du CO2 issu de son activité. Je pense à l'agroalimentaire en particulier, où là, on va venir prendre le CO2 biogénique et par addition de méthane, haché sur le réseau par garantie d'origine et autres, on va venir produire du méthanol. Alors là, si on fait un focus sur la réaction chimique, on voit bien que donc, CO2 plus CH4, ça donne 2 CO et 2 hydrogènes. Or, pour faire du méthanol, et ça a été montré tout à l'heure, il faut 2 fois plus d'hydrogène que de CO. Et bien là, vu qu'on a une technologie qui est assez flexible et qui permet différentes applications, on se propose de rajouter 2 autres briques, donc 2 autres petits réacteurs, réformage à la vapeur. Donc on va venir réformage à la vapeur suivi de water gas shift, où finalement on va venir booster la production d'hydrogène en prenant une molécule de méthane en plus et en rajoutant de la vapeur d'eau, suivi de la water gas shift, et en fait on va recycler le CO2 dans la brique de réformage à sec. Donc là on voit qu'on a une production, un coproduit qui est de l'hydrogène vert, donc qui est un coproduit de luxe. L'intérêt de ce système-là, c'est que finalement en voyant ça de plus haut, ça permet vraiment une intégration dans un écosystème un peu plus large. Ça permet l'intégration territoriale de la production de biogaz avec potentiellement les collectivités, parce que ce coproduit qui est l'hydrogène vert peut très bien être envoyé dans une station-service pour des besoins de mobilité sur le territoire, ou ça peut également favoriser une intégration avec les industriels qui auraient besoin d'hydrogène vert pour leurs activités. Et enfin, surtout, ça permet surtout une production d'hydrogène vert à bas coût, parce que finalement, la source, c'est le biogaz. On ne passe pas du tout par la case électrolyse, avec les rendements d'électrolyse, et surtout le coût de l'électricité verte qui n'est pas anodin. Où nous en sommes ? Alors, l'année passée, nous avons donc dimensionné un démonstrateur qui prend 20 normomètres cubes par heure de biogaz pour venir produire du méthanol. Nous avons finalisé la construction de ce démonstrateur qui tient dans un conteneur que vous voyez. Et ce conteneur va être installé dans notre hall d'essai situé à Lille au cours du premier semestre 2024. L'idée, c'est que sur 2024, on va opérer, on va optimiser, on va valider tout ce qui est garantie de performance, stabilité d'opération, dans l'objectif, en 2025, de lancer notre premier industriel, donc de taille plus conséquente. Là, on parle d'un démonstrateur de 20 normomètres cubes. L'idée, ce serait l'année prochaine de se lancer sur un 200 normaux. Ce démonstrateur va aussi être amené à être déplacé sur différents sites industriels, producteurs de biogaz, donc différentes typologies de biogaz. L'idée étant de valider finalement la performance du procédé sur différents types de biogaz. Le biogaz issu de méthanisation agricole est différent de celui issu de steppe, etc. Nous avons, comme je l'ai mentionné tout à l'heure, finalisé une levée de fonds de 12 millions d'euros. Et cette levée de fonds va également servir à financer notre premier industriel de l'année prochaine. Voilà, merci pour votre attention. Comme je l'ai mentionné tout à l'heure, je fais une deuxième présentation plus orientée méthaniseur, avec proposition de modèle économique et proposition de valeur en milieu d'après-midi à 15h30, en salle biogaz.
Merci Marion. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions pour Marion, s'il vous plaît? Oui, une question ici.
Mon question about the rendement en masse du reformage à sec, en masse ou molle.
Alors, grosso modo, règle du pouce, on se dit que pour 200 normomètres cubes par heure de biogaz, donc un méthane plus CO2, on va venir produire 2000 tonnes par an de biométhanol. Voilà, ça permet d'avoir un ratio 10.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Ibrahim. Je viens de l'Afrique, plus précisément du Sénégal. Je vous remercie pour la présentation. Bon, moi, ma question, c'est est-ce que votre entreprise envisage de s'ouvrir vers les autres pays ou bien pour le moment vous êtes tout simplement localisé au niveau de la France? Merci.
Alors oui, tout à fait. On envisage effectivement de se déployer. Pour l'instant, Voilà, le démonstrateur cette année, il est en France et il va être déployé, enfin il va être mobilisé sur différents sites industriels en France, mais effectivement, on vise l'international, Europe et au-delà. C'est vraiment petit à petit, c'est en fonction de notre développement. Voilà.
Une autre question peut-être? Ok, bah merci beaucoup Marion. Et Marion, c'est cet après-midi à 15h30 dans la salle biogaz qui est juste à côté, si ça vous intéresse. Bon, on arrive à la fin. Je pense que c'était une session assez fascinante, avec des perspectives complètement certaines qu'on ne connaissait pas du tout, qui arrivent sur la scène. Ça donne beaucoup d'espoir, je pense. Moi, je trouve qu'il y a tellement un jeu en termes de décarboniser des fossiles, le secteur maritime, mais pas que. Et beaucoup d'innovation, beaucoup d'ingénuité, beaucoup d'imagination. Et comme on dit en anglais, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Et donc là, il y a plein d'aventuristes. Et j'espère pour vous que vous allez tous arriver à avoir... Voilà, avancez sur vos projets. Et il y a des acteurs importants de demain qui nous permettra tous, qui va être à la bénéfice de nous tous en fait. Il n'y a pas de question. C'est pour nous, c'est important que vous vous développez et vous êtes des acteurs clés et significatifs de demain. Alors, avant qu'on termine, est-ce qu'il y a peut-être une dernière question de quelqu'un qui souhaiterait poser une question globale, générale sur le sujet? Il reste quelques idées que vous souhaiterez évoquer. Vous êtes bienvenus de les poser maintenant, c'est l'occasion. I would like then just to ask just a quick question to Tim, actually, if I may. Surprise. So obviously you have a lot of background experience and knowledge of maritime sector as a whole. Today you've heard a different number of presentations. For you, what's your initial reaction? How do you feel? Have you learned some things here anew? Do you think it's important to we bridge between the world of maritime and the providers of the technologies for the future, the feedstock managers as well? What's your initial reaction to how it's gone for you today?
Thanks, Paul. Great question. And it's been really interesting to sit here listening to these future fuels, which are coming along and various stages of development by these companies. From my perspective, as I outlined in my presentation at the start, there's a massive scale of decarbonisation needed. So the things that I've been writing down here on my notepad in front of me are thinking about, okay, which of these can scale fast enough to achieve the needs of the industry? And I think they've all got the potential to. And Jesper, I think you had a slide near the end of your deck about, okay, for that 5% in 2030, how many plants does that mean? And I think it's when we sort of do that number crunching that we sort of get a sense of, wow, we're going to need to really scale quite quickly. And keep going on past 2030 as well. So I would really encourage you to be ambitious in those growth plans and just making sure you're looking in that end goal. And I'm pretty sure from what I was hearing today with the sort of greenhouse gas intensities that you're all looking at, that that they're going to meet those future needs. But bear that in mind. Those fuels need to work for some of those fuels that you were on the panel talking about were drop-in fuels that if you can find those markets and get them dropped in, then that immediately provides a short-term benefit as well as in the long term. And others which are the likes of and biomethanol, those require some changes in the maritime sector for some different engines. So that requires investment, and that requires the sector to know what's coming up to be able to trust that the fuel supply can indeed provide. So all that marketing that you can do to tell the world, this is how much we can scale, this is how much we can provide, and this is the likely price range that we're looking at. I think that's going to be very helpful for the industry.
Thank you, Tim. Would any of our panelists like to say a last closing word or give us a last thoughts? Jesper would.
Some while ago, I heard there's this Maersk McKinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping in Denmark, where they've collected all the shipping industry stakeholders in a kind of a roundtable kind of organization. So the problem is the scalability of all these things, and that we need to scale this up fast to reach these millions of tons of methanol that is needed to decarbonize, defossilize really which is to the fuels for ships. So they said that they were looking into a scenario where this is not going to happen. I mean, it's not with the rate we're doing it today. It will come, but not by 2030 or maybe not even 2050. So they're also looking into all these, for example, blue hydrogen, looking into, okay, so we need to sort of realize that the fossil fuels are here to stay for a long time. So to reach all these targets, we need to do something else as a stepping stone towards scaling up all these new green technologies. So blue hydrogen, where you make fuels out of fossil fuels and then do carbon capture and store the carbon underground, is probably something we're looking into the next 15, 20 years on a large scale as well.
Another reality check. But it's important to have it. Even if the ideal world would not be to have blue hydrogen, but to have all green fuels, that's our ideal world. It is a question of time. Scalability isn't a question; it's a question of the time scale to achieve it. But let's hope you'll all prove them wrong, and that you will scale as much as you possibly can. And we look forward to seeing you coming back and showing those new slides with plants established. So I think it's been really fascinating. Thank you very much, all our panelists. Thank you much to everybody and for your inputs. And there's more this afternoon, of course. I just wanted to mention that. We have a really interesting afternoon as well. So after a sandwich, do come back for more. Okay, thank you very much indeed.